name is Melissa. I am program lead at Iterative. Hsu Ken will be joining shortly, managing partner at Iterative, and he'll be taking a lot of these questions. But happy Thursday to everybody. I'll just do a quick recap of where we are in the validation program, and then we can move on to questions right after that. If you wanted to go ahead and start populating questions, I already put the link in the chat. So go ahead and ask your questions there, upvote any questions that you're interested in, and we'll prioritize questions that are related to the module first, and then validation, and then any general questions that you might have after that. Week 3 is coming to a close. So we are almost done with the validation program. Next week is our final week. We have 3 modules that we'll share with you on Monday. The last module being kind of a roundup of resources and key takeaways for you to have about all the various modules that we've covered so far. And we have our final office hour week next week. But to kind of bring it back to present day with week 3, just a quick recap of this week. This week, we completed the final deep dive of the 3 components. So hopefully this is very familiar to you, and I sound like a broken record right now, but the 3 components that are needed to run a validation experiment. The first component is generating traffic. The second one is communicating your idea. And the third one is measuring interest. This week, module 5 was all about measuring interest. So we talked about how to measure interest, how to rank measures of interest, and also how to create interest funnels. So that was module 5. Module 6 was Hsu Ken actually sharing his personal experience with an idea that he had when he first moved to Singapore, and how he went about validating that idea. If you haven't checked that video out, would definitely encourage you to do so. That video, the idea for that video was to kind of take all of these concepts and theory and kind of putting it into like real life application for you. So hopefully that video was helpful. Does anybody remember the name of the startup that Hsu Ken started and what module 6 was all about when he first moved to Singapore and was validating it? If you remember, put it in the chat. That can be kind of our keyword for this week. Speaking of that, similar to last week, yeah, connecting restaurant owners and workers. You forgot the name. All good. Single shift. That's right, Samir. Samir, you were good with the keyword last week as well. eSIMs. But appreciate that. Yeah, single shift is right. Speaking of that, I'm gonna put a poll up right now. This is just helpful for us to like get context to who has watched the videos this week. Again, like no pressure, understand that you all are managing your own time, and this material is available for you whenever you're ready for it, but wanted to just get a sense of who has watched what. So I just put a poll up. Can you all see the poll?
Yep.
Cool. All right, got some people answering it. I'll give it another few seconds. Hsu Ken is in a co-working space right now, hence his different background. But it seems like it's going well for him.
We are having a Iterative Founders co-working day today. So we're having a bunch of founders. We're all working in the same spot.
Okay, let me give it 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, let me end the poll. All right, can you all see this, the results?
Yep.
So I think somewhat similar to last week, where we've have almost half who've watched all the videos, about a fifth of you who've watched more than half, and then a third of you who haven't watched it yet but are planning to after today's session, which is fine. So that just gives us good context as we go into these questions, and as Hsu Ken's answering some of these, knowing that most of you have watched, or some of you have watched most of them, but some of you may not have watched them yet. All right. Anything else you want to share right now, Hsu Ken, before we head to questions?
No, I'm good. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah. Let me share my screen.
Excited to answer questions. These are always fun. I have a good time answering questions.
Yeah, we get some good questions too, which is great. All right. Okay, so this first question, how to measure the scalability of your thesis if it's a mix of SaaS and operations?
Scalability of your thesis. If you are there, I think I might need some help with this. Like scalability as in kind of like market size, or I guess if I take it.
Hey, hi, I'll take it.
Yeah.
I put that question. I wanted to understand this in two parts, right?
Mm.
So, what we are currently trying to do is help simplify sourcing for e-commerce retailers, right?
Yep.
And in that process, now at the moment, email marketing is the funnel through which we are validating
Yep.
towards sales. So there is a certain conversion ratio, which let's say if after 1,000 emails I have one conversion, looks unrealistic that out of 7 million, only 7,000 stores might convert at a larger scale, and that looks like a small market eventually.
Yep.
But then do the so that one aspect is of conversion scalability, and second is that if we are doing it partially with SaaS and partially manually handling the operations today, with time, how do you see that these things can be automated and these things cannot be, and how do you justify it to an investor that today until this point we'll have to do it manually, but eventually this is how we plan to automate it.
Okay. Sorry. So is the question actually like, because I find like there's two parts to this question. Like one of it is like, did I hear that you're kind of validating and there wasn't as many people kind of responding, and so you were wondering if the market was small, or is it that it's going well, but you're doing it quite manually, and then you know you're
Yeah, so
trying to figure out how automated you can make this?
first bit is that the conversion to reach out to sales, right, is almost 0.01%.
Yeah.
And the second part is that the way we are providing the solution today, it's a
Yep.
mix of SaaS plus operation, but
Yep.
eventually you want it to be entirely SaaS.
I see. Got it. Okay. Let me tackle the first question first. So if the response rate is pretty low, one of two things could be true. One is uh, the way that you are talking about, or whoever you're going after, all of that kind of like questions, you could be going after the wrong person, saying the wrong thing, blah, 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 right? So it could be true that the market is good, but you just need to figure out who you should be selling to, how to sell to them, how to talk to them about it, all that kind of stuff. So in that case, then you just start A/B testing kind of your ideas, start trying to sell to kind of different people, all this kind of stuff. The best way to do that is like not randomly. It's kind of like obviously doing kind of like concerted test every week, right? So it's like, okay, this group of people that I'm targeting, I get this kind of response rate. Okay, what about these two groups? Okay, so you do all that stuff. The third piece, the second piece, which is about a lot of what you're doing now is manual, and then automating in the future. And I think you said an added part about like convincing investors. Okay.
Yeah.
So to me, by the way, the first part is far more important than the second part. And so being able to show that there are people who want your product, who they are, and all of that kind of stuff is way more important than being able to show that what you're doing is kind of like scalable. The reason why I say that is because you can, with enough kind of ingenuity and kind of like that kind of stuff, you can almost make anything kind of scalable one way or another. Like you can kind of solve it and figure it out, right? And so the much I would much rather have a product that a lot of people wanted that I needed to go figure out how to scale than a product that I could scale but nobody wanted, right? I mean, obviously, right? So I think that the scaling part I think is, I don't know, more straightforward to me. Like that's just an engineering problem, just like figure out how to kind of do this. I think for the investor part of it, it's hard to know what their kind of objections are and stuff, but like, I don't know, good investors typically have the imagination to kind of recognize that like this is something that can be like scaled. And so I don't know. I like what is their problem? Like, why do they not think that you can scale?
So I think traditionally because B2B marketplaces have failed, where sourcing is the primary problem that they are solving. Moving on from trade shows to here, but we feel there are parts of the funnel in apparel, the industry, where we are trying to solve this, where standardizations have not been there, and those can be done today, right? The supplier has a catalog at there, and all of those things. If there are nuanced answers to it, but to help give that download of your learnings to an investor, maybe that is the gap where I'm
Yeah,
seeing.
it could be how you're kind of communicating. They may not understand it. Like, look, investors are just people. They like misunderstand stuff. And, as an investor, I can say this, we're not like geniuses or anything like that. We're just as dumb as, actually we're probably dumber than most people. And so it could just be that. So I think maybe I would take this in a couple of ways. And one is, how do you think you would automate this? So obviously you want to kind of convince yourself first that there's a thing you can do to kind of automate it. Then you want to like try to explain that to investors. If investors don't understand that, then I think you can like ask them questions about it. So one thing that I feel like founders don't do enough of on investor calls is they don't kind of like ask questions back a lot of the time. They're just like I'll ask a question and they'll like say something, and I'll kind of like be like, I don't know if I really get it, and then I'll like ask another question or whatever. But a lot of times good founders will be like, hey, here's how we think we can automate it, blah blah blah, and this kind of stuff. Like, and if the investor is like, hey, I don't know if I really like believe it, and I'll be like, okay, cool, talk to me about it. Like, what do you think is the really hard part about automating? I want to try to understand, like, and then you kind of do the judo move of like have them talk about it, and then you can address what they are saying. And if you do that, you can kind of pretty quickly figure out whether they understand what you're talking about or like whatever that is. And so, yeah. But I say this in kind of one of the modules, but maybe the thing that I would, my general advice for everybody on almost everything is just work the problem, right? So it's like, okay, they don't understand. Okay, they they don't understand, so why do they not understand? Okay, like, is it I'm not communicating it poorly? Do they not believe what I'm saying? Like, what's kind of going, you just kind of start working on it. And so yeah, for both of those I would just do that.
Thank you.
Cool, thanks. I feel like we met before, by the way. You look familiar.
Yeah, I think last to last call.
Okay, see, yeah,
Yeah.
nice to see you again.
All right, thanks, Steve, for the question and for hopping on. Similar to last time, if you had questions that you want to ask Hsu Ken directly, feel free to raise your hand so we can alternate between the queue and people who've raised their hands. Also, thanks for sending us such great questions. I know this is our third week into this, but seeing some really good questions in the queue here. So this next one, if you have many startup ideas, full-time job, how would you structure your time to start? Validating new ideas every couple of weeks until something has signs?
The great question, and I reacted that way because it's like, I mean, that's how I started out, right? When I started validating ideas, I had a full-time job, and so this just brought back memories and kind of experiences. Melissa, by the way, you have to relaunch to update your Chrome browser.
I know. I have too many tabs open to do that right now.
Okay, got it. Oh, you're one of those people, many tabs people. Okay, so how would I structure my time? The way that I think about it, and look, everybody has different ways of working, and so you want to figure out what works for you. Let me just talk about what worked for me. I'm really bad at context switching. And so what that means is I'm really bad at working at a lot of different things kind of in succession. So like if I have to do A, then B, then C, then D, I don't know. I'm just like really bad at multitasking. And so I can only kind of think about one thing at a time. So what I ended up doing was, 5 days a week during the normal weekday, I just did my full-time job, right? Saturdays, for the most part, I kind of like took off, and then I spent all of Sunday working on the startup. That was like my work day for like the startup. And actually, it's kind of interesting now, even at Iterative, that's kind of how my schedule kind of works, actually, is like I spend all of Sunday kind of like working. And it doesn't feel that weird to me. I'm not saying everybody should work on Sundays or whatever, but like it doesn't feel that weird to me because I started out by doing that here. And then my my part-time Sunday job became my full-time job. And so I don't know, I just spend my Sundays kind of working on it. So that's typically what I do. And it just helps kind of like my brain. So 5 days a week, do my normal job, normal person. Saturday, do whatever you want, have a good time, like that kind of stuff. And then Sundays to me, I was like, okay, that's when I'm going to kind of like work on my startup ideas. And maybe the thing I would suggest if you have a lot of startup ideas is I always kept a prioritized list of startup ideas, and then I just worked down the list. So let's say if you have 20 ideas, prioritize which ideas you think are kind of like most promising, and then kind of obviously work on them first. I think the rule that I gave myself was at any given time, I'm going to work on 3 different startup ideas to validate. And if if one of the ideas doesn't look promising and I no longer believe in it, I kick it out and then I put the next idea into the slot. So at any time, 3 startup ideas, and I'm just like removing ideas from a slot and adding another idea to the slot. And then that's how I did it. And I did it every Sunday, and I just kept doing it that way. So that's kind of how I did it. Hopefully that's helpful. But if you had kind of like a deeper question, let me know.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah, it's interesting to hear your process and approach, Hsu Ken, but like you said earlier, like everybody kind of has to figure out their own rhythm for these types of things too.
And by the way, just as an alternate one, my brother, who is basically a night owl and does most of his best work at night, he just did his at night. Like he basically like went to work, did all that stuff, ate dinner or whatever, and then like 11 to like 2 a.m. was just like he like worked on startup ideas. It's different for everybody. And then he got to keep his weekends basically. That was like the choice he made.
All right, this next one is part 1 of a 2-part question. Should post-signup conversations prioritize customer discovery or sales script to close sales?
Great question. This depends a lot on the stage at which you are at. So what I mean by that is, if you are at the like validation stage, which I'll just assume since it's kind of like the core here, then to me, customer discovery is kind of the thing that matters the most. You want to learn about your customers because at your stage, that's the thing that primarily matters. I will kind of point out though that at the end of the call, trying to close the sale actually teaches you quite a lot about customer discovery. So I think something that people get wrong sometimes is that they get on these calls and they're very kind of like buddy friendly. And it's because they think that they're all about doing customer discovery, which is, fine. I get how that works. But I often find that the time that you learn the most about customers is when you ask them to give you money. Right. And it's like, what do they say? What is their response? Like, do they just hang up immediately? And so I think customer discovery is the primary thing you should be worried about when you're doing especially when validation, but being able to close the sale or trying to close the sale is often one of the best ways to do customer discovery, even though it is not the like end goal. Yeah, I think about closing sales as kind of like a means to an end. So yeah, what's the second part? That's part 1, right?
Second part, yes. Part 2, depending on the focus, what specific questions or script points should be used?
Oh, okay. So I guess a couple of things. These types of calls, it's funny, during the batch, we often will have founders record calls for us and then like send it to us. And so we can kind of like see if they're doing them kind of like correctly, at least according to us. And I can almost kind of tell if the call is productive or not productive based on how much the founder talks and how much the customer talks. If the founder spends most of the time talking, I'm like, yep, you failed, right? Like what you want to do is you want to get the customers talking as much as possible. And ideally about the like problem that they have that you are interested in kind of solving for them. And you want to understand kind of like everything kind of like about it. And so I don't know, like just because I saw Melissa just drinking water. Let's say the problem I'm solving is something ridiculous, like how to help people who work at home drink more water. It's a ridiculous problem to kind of like solve, but let's say that's what I'm doing. And if I'm a call with Melissa, I would just ask her, I'd be like, Melissa, do you feel like you drink enough water at home? Like kind of like yes or no? And I'd be like, does that matter to you? Like, do you care? And she'd be like, well, this kind of stuff. And I'd be like, well, how much water do you actually drink? And she'll kind of tell me, and I'll be like, have you tried to do anything to kind of drink more water? Why do you feel like you need to drink more water? Like, I'm just asking Melissa kind of like questions about Like, what are her habits? Why does she care? And like, I don't know, maybe Melissa is like, oh, well, I want to drink more water because, I don't know, skincare, which is what my girlfriend always tells me drinking water is apparently for. And I'll be like, okay, well, like, how much water do you need? Like, how much water do you need to drink in order for that? So you're just like asking them lots of questions about kind of the problems and seeing what they're doing to kind of solve it. And if they haven't done anything to solve it, then the thing I extrapolate from that a little bit is like, I don't know if they care about it enough. Like, if you care about it enough, maybe they would have done something about it. If they give me this long thing about like, oh my gosh, I've tried 10 things. I bought a bigger water bottle. I like moved my desk next to the thing. None of it seems to work. I'd be like, ooh, okay, well, they're passionate about kind of the problem that they're trying to solve, and they've actually tried to solve it themselves, which means that they're motivated enough to like solve it, right? So they're just like looking for kind of a reason to do it, which is very different from like Melissa tells me all these things about how she wants to drink water, and I'll be like, Melissa, what have you tried to drink water differently? And she's like, oh, I haven't tried anything. I'm like, okay, Melissa probably doesn't care about it that much, right? And so you want to kind of just like have a lot of these kind of like conversations. And you want to kind of focus it around kind of like why they do what they do, and kind of all the context on all the contextual information. Maybe I'll talk a little bit too about trying to close the sale and how you get information from that. So I remember one of the founders in the last batch, I was reviewing one of their customer calls, and it was like an AI company. They were building a tool for AI company. They're talking to this AI engineer, and there was a 30-minute call, and they spent the first 20 minutes talking about all the exciting things that are happening in AI. And I was like, oh my God, this is the worst. Like, that's not what your company is about. Why does this like matter? They were just like friends talking about AI. I was like, that's not what it's about. In the last like 5 minutes, she goes, oh, by the way, my company does this thing. Would your company pay for this? And the person on the phone goes, nah, they probably wouldn't pay. And her response was, oh, okay, cool. Thanks. And I wrote her this thing. I was like, first of all, why'd you spend the first 20 minutes just like shooting the shit about kind of like AI stuff? And then when you asked that question about would they pay, the person said no, and you just like let it go. Like, that is the thing you want to dive into. And she's like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, well, what I would have done is like, hey, totally understand that you don't like that they wouldn't pay. Why don't you think they would pay? And they'll be like, oh, well, they don't really like paying for a lot of software. I'm like, okay, well, do they pay for any software? What kinds of software do they pay for? Okay, like, why do you think that doesn't fall into it? How do you make who typically makes decisions about whether whether we pay for stuff? Like, do you make that call, or is like somebody else make that call? And so even if they say no, there's like so much you can gather from like, why don't you think they would pay for it? Who typically makes that call? Like, okay, what other stuff do you guys pay for? Like, there's tons of stuff. And remember, I just wrote her this email. I was just like, oh man, you like had him at the place that you wanted him, and then you just like didn't ask any more questions after that. So hopefully random anecdotes will kind of like help you guys on how to kind of talk about these calls.
Thanks, Hsu Ken. We also have, it's more related to growth, but we also have some articles about how to generate user insights, how to talk to users, how to get users to talk to you, that I can share after the call as well with everybody.
Should do a video maybe on just like customer calls at some point.
Yeah, I was thinking that like what we do with founders, maybe we can like figure out a way to do that with the public. All right, next question. If there's appetite for that, let us know. Okay. Seems we don't have good market validation based on our metric measurements. We want to pivot, but my CTO seems burned out. Any advice?
Ooh. Hard to know without kind of like asking more questions here. Like, to me, I'm kind of like, what makes you think that they're burned out? Those kinds of questions, right? So I have no idea whether he or she is actually burned out or not. The one thing I can say is that I would ask them. I would like have a conversation with them. I think as co-founders, you want to be able to kind of like have honest conversations. So if you think that this is the case, it might warrant kind of a conversation with them about that. And so yeah, I tend to be kind of, when it comes to co-founder relationships, I feel like the best policy is just like open and honest feedback. And I would talk to them about it, and don't assume that they are, and don't accuse them of being burned out. I think you can just be like, hey, you've been working for a little while. I've noticed kind of like some differences. Here's kind of what I'm seeing. Like, how are you feeling about stuff? Right. And let them kind of have an opportunity to talk. So yeah, that's how I would kind of like go about it.
Cool. If you have any follow-up questions to that, let us know. Next one, specifically for a marketplace to validate. Since we're quite dependent on the vendor support, any tips to convince a vendor to validate together?
Then validate together. Part of me is like, and again, I don't totally understand the business, but part of me is like, if it's a two-sided marketplace, then like vendors are just your customers or something like that, right? And so you just have like one side is kind of like vendors that are part of your customers, and then the other side is kind of like whoever the customers for the vendors are, and so it's different. Convince a vendor. So I guess maybe where you're at is maybe you're trying to convince the first couple of like vendors to be part of your platform on and all of that kind of stuff. A couple of things that you can do here. And let me just make it kind of concrete because, again, I've used this example so many times. I feel like I just did this startup idea just so I could use it in examples. But again, I did the single shift thing. It was a blue collar staffing platform. And I guess my version of vendors was probably like restaurants. And so I had to convince the first couple of restaurants on. So a couple of tips to kind of like do this. One is try to make it as risk-free as possible for them. And so what I used to do at restaurants was I would be like, hey, I know you have this part-time help, need this part-time help. Like, let me help you with that. And I was like, if I don't find you anybody, you don't pay me like anything at all. Right. So again, I tried to remove risk from like, I didn't ask them to pay me and then, see, because they're probably like, I don't know if this person can do what they say they're going to do. So I was like, hey, only pay me if it kind of happens. The other thing that kind of happened too was they were like, well, what if they don't show up? And I was like, look, if they don't show up, I will pay you back in equal wages. Like I would just be like, I'll give you money, basically. And again, I'm like trying to kind of like make this as no-brainer as possible. And by the way, what I did was I said, if nobody shows up, I will pay you an extra wages. And for the first 5 jobs, I went to the job and waited outside in case nobody showed up. And I was prepared to basically like wash dishes in case, just so I didn't have to kind of like pay the money. So how do you make it kind of like risk-free for them? The other thing you might be surprised on, and I don't know what vendors you're kind of looking for, but the thing that surprised me was that a lot of these smaller SMEs and stuff are like, think startups are exciting. And so they were kind of like willing to kind of like work with me, and like I kind of met them and that kind of stuff, and it was like, hey, I'm kind of doing this thing, and they kind of understood the like, SME kind of like starting something kind of energy. If you are trying to convince Microsoft to do something, it's a completely different playbook, right? So maybe I should said that up front. Like very large companies have very different kind of like decisions on how they make decisions, and they are unlikely to want to validate anything with you, if I'm being honest. And so I think much easier to go after kind of the smaller guys, but just figure out how you can make it kind of risk-free and kind of riskless to them. See how you can kind of over deliver on kind of like promises and that kind of stuff. And so I think those are kind of like probably the best ways to kind of go about it. But honestly, the absolute best thing you can do to convince vendors is solve a problem they really care about, right? Like, again, I don't know how much Melissa actually cares about drinking water, but like, there's only so much I can do to convince Melissa to pay me $20 a month so she drinks more water. There's only so much I can do. If Melissa really doesn't care about drinking water, like, she's not going to pay me, right? And so, best thing you can do is work on something that they actually really care about, and then secondarily from that, try to make it as riskless as possible and that kind of thing. Actually, sorry, random idea, random story. This is not a vendor thing, but I remember the story of how Stripe got started. So Stripe payments gateway, obviously, and nobody wanted to use them as a payments gateway as a first customer because you're like, payments is how I make money. I'm not going to trust this completely unproven startup to like handle all my money. Like I would never do that. And so what Stripe did was they convinced someone who was really desperate and was in a like tight pickle to basically do it. And this person was like, hey, I need this to work in like a week and I need no hiccups. Like, so this person was like, I can't do it all the other people because like I need this. And as the story goes, I think Patrick Collison said, we can do that. In fact, I will sit in your office the entire week to help your engineering team integrate with Stripe. And if you have any problems, I will just like be there. And so that first partner, he sat in a conference room in their office for the entire first week, just in case. Right? He's like, I'll make it happen for you. And I think that kind of like helped a lot. And again, kind of like going above and beyond. You can do this as like an early stage startup. Like you can have Patrick Collison sitting in your kind of like office. You can't do this as a large company. And this is one of the few cases where being a smaller company has advantages. So like use it, right? You can kind of like be there. I think I used to tell restaurants, I was like, hey, by the way, I'm going to wash dishes for you if nobody shows up. Like, trust me, you know what I mean? Like I will be there. Like I'll make sure this happens.
I didn't know that about Stripe. That's interesting.
Yeah. First customer sat in the thing.
Nice. Next question. For early stage startups, what are your thoughts of going free first, getting customers hooked on your core product before testing out the paid features?
Your thoughts of getting free first. Oh, haha. Yeah. So this is a really interesting thing. We used to debate this so much early on. Okay, so this is a classic startup founder debate that kind of goes on for like every kind of like startup founder. Here's how it typically goes. We really want people to try our product, so we should kind of like make it free. And then once they really like love it, then we can like charge them money later. And so we should offer things for free now. And the psychology of typically what ends up happening, at least in my experience, is startup founders are afraid to charge people for money because they know the product is kind of underbuilt and kind of doesn't work that well and kind of like all of that kind of stuff. So a lot of times founders say exactly what this is, but really if you dig in deeper, they're kind of embarrassed by their product because again, it's a startup and it kind of like half works half the time. And so they are afraid to kind of like ask people to pay for this thing that they kind of threw together. There's different schools of thought, but at least the school of thought that we give to our iterative founders, and Brian and I come on, is we ask people to pay from the beginning. And the reason why we kind of do that is because we want to see how much they really care about it. We used to do this. This is exactly what we used to do. And what we basically found out was we would do this, we would build a product, people would use it. And then they would use it and we'd be like, hey, you guys like it? And they'd be like, yeah, they like it, yeah. And we're like building features for them. And we're like, oh, great, people are using our product, whatever. And then at some point we were like, okay, let's like pay features. And then everybody would stop using the product. And we were like, shit, we just spent the past year building stuff. And because we thought these people really cared about it and they didn't really care about it. They said they cared about it, but like the real thing that you kind of test on whether they care about it is like, will they kind of pay you for it, right? The other interesting thing that we've also found with this is oftentimes charging money, this is so counterintuitive. Oftentimes charging money increases your sales conversion. And I think the psychology goes something like this. If people offer it as free, the perceived value of the product is lower. And so if you charge money, they think the product is more valuable than it kind of like is. And it's just like a perception. Let me tell a short story on a company that we invested in once. Okay, here, I can give you the website for it. It's this company, which is kind of reasonably successful. Okay, it's this company. Don't tell them I told you this story. Okay, so this company, which was super hot during COVID, so they helped you kind of do online events and stuff and that kind of thing. And they had more customers than they could handle, which is a great place to be on. I know I wish I was them too, and you guys all wish they were them, but they did. And one thing they started doing was, I was talking to the founder once, and he got on call. He's like, "Yeah, we're like going well, we're growing fast or whatever." He was like, "I think we're charging too little money." I was like, "Okay, well, what are you talking about?" And he was like, "I don't know. It's just kind of like a hunch." And I was like, "Okay, well, what are you going to do to test it?" He's like, "You know what? I have 8 sales calls the rest of the day. I'm going to double the price of my software product on every call until someone says no." So for that day, he literally got on, and every call he doubled his price. So it's like first call is like, yeah, $200 a month. Next call, $400 a month. Next, $800 a month. Next call, $1,600. He just doubled it. And by the way, he didn't get no until several days later, and somebody paid him 150,000 USD for an annual contract because they were a publicly traded company. And he said they actually was closing faster, and his hunch is the publicly traded company wouldn't have signed if it was $20 a month. And the reason why is publicly traded company needs enterprise grade software, and sometimes they mistaken price for enterprise grade software, even though it's the same. So if you had told the publicly traded company, which by the way, publicly traded company was the company that my father worked at, and so I just thought it was hilarious, and I told him this story, and he was super pissed at whoever did it. But they expect to pay that kind of money because they expect that kind of like a product that is worth that much. And so we kind of did it. And so I don't know. I thought that was always such an interesting like thing. And I think startups founders don't often experiment enough with pricing, and they like, I don't know, let's say you say some price and somebody laughs you out of the room. It's not that big of a deal actually, right? Like it's fine, you know? And so I think more people should kind of like try just like, hey, yeah, it's a good product. You should pay me $10 a month, right? Or $20 a month or $50 a month or like whatever. So I don't know. Sorry. I don't know if that story kind of is helpful, but the anecdotes are always kind of like interesting to me. But I do think that charging people for money actually makes them think your product is going to be more kind of like valuable than it is, very counterintuitively. By the way, I think in A16 has a whole thing on pricing. They have this whole blog post about pricing. And I think at the very end, they like summarize it as in like, our general advice for all startups thinking about pricing is you should probably 10x your price. I think is like literally what they say at the end. I should go look up this article, but if you look up A16 pricing, I think it shows up.
Yeah, we'll try to find it and
Yeah.
send it. That's really interesting.
Pricing, so it's such a psychological thing. Like price is such a psychological thing.
Yeah, and ironic that that was the company your father worked at.
Yeah, he was so pissed.
Okay, this question has been upvoted. It's a follow-up. Follow-up to the time structure with job question. Are you the idea of quit your job and focus on startup while it's not entirely validated?
Okay, this is a great it's a good question. I think this comes down to what is your personal risk appetite and what are kind of your means and risk and resources and all of that kind of stuff. So I think this is very personal, and so you have to kind of like weigh it to your kind of like personal situation. To me, quitting your job, I just think about this very pragmatically. If you can only validate your startup idea on a Sunday, and you kind of like do that, obviously if you quit your job, you get more time to work on it, and so you can validate faster or more ideas, right? And so that's kind of how I would think about it. And then the question just comes down to like, can you kind of like do that? Like, so for example, like me, Hsu Ken, right now, would I quit my job to focus on a startup even if I haven't validated? 100%, right? Like I kind of have some reasonable means where it's like, yeah, I can kind of like live for a while without kind of like needing a job. And so I would just, and that's what I've done in, okay, the second company. And I know Brian for the third company, we didn't have a job and we full-time were like working on validating ideas. And again, because we had some means to be able to do it, we weren't taking kind of as much risk. And, we wanted to kind of spend as much time kind of on that as possible. So if you have that kind of risk tolerance or kind of like means, then I think it's okay, right? But you just want to be pragmatic in thinking about it as like, hey, I want to kind of work on these ideas. I want more time to work on it. I want to be able to kind of do this a little bit faster. I'm going to like take this path, which is I'm not going to get paid and all of that kind of stuff. I'm going to trade that in so that I can get more time to this. And again, I'll be fully transparent to everybody here. You may do this and you may not find an idea, and you have to be okay with that too, right? So even when Brian and I have kind of done this, I mean, we'll go through like a year of full-time validating ideas. I don't know how many dozens of ideas, and we'll like not have anything after the year. And that's kind of okay with us because I mean, we could kind of do that, but we like went in knowing like this is kind of how things go. So if it's okay with you and if you think that's going to be helpful, then I think it's kind of appropriate. But I think for most people, especially kind of like it's your kind of first startup and stuff, I wouldn't advise this because I think it's just like you're taking quite a bit of risk initially. My best advice to most people is start off by trying to validate ideas part-time first, kind of get some learnings in, kind of see how you feel, kind of like just like get your like feet underneath you a little bit, then see how you're kind of feeling and what like how you feeling about some of your ideas, and like then make the decision of being like, okay, I'm gonna like forego my job so that I can kind of like do this faster and hit it harder or whatever. So
yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
That was again my question. I'm feeling shy because I've been like previously, so I feel like I'm stealing someone's time.
No, you're fine.
I wanted to follow up because just I know that you studied math, so I wanted to kind of elaborate a little bit in terms of math, because I've read an article that said that like there are linear jobs where you can apply linear effort and improve your salary, like I don't know, lawyer,
linearly,
doctor, whatever. And there are non-linear, which are like founder, YouTuber, musician. And so basically, like it's like in poker, like each one of your bet might result in 0 or sometimes even in a negative value, but you never have actually the you have no certainty that you will result in 10x, 1000x, or something like that. So what I wanted to kind of what I was trying to ask with this question is like, what is the most viable strategy for applying your effort in terms of like succeeding in start? Because you cannot control the outside world and probabilities, like they will work the way they work, but you can control your effort. So yeah, I'm sorry if that's like a super,
no and no, I think maybe some clarifying questions. I think it also kind of then the question also comes down to kind of like, what are you kind of like optimizing for, right? And so what I mean by that is non-linear jobs jobs that require non-linear effort and have non-linear outcomes tend to provide a lot of stability, right? So like, I mean, you can kind of like have that as a stability. So you're trading off kind of the non-linear outcomes for stability is typically what the trade-off ends up happening. So for most people, they work at a job and by the way, nothing wrong with any of that. They work at a job and salary and it's very stable, but no kind of like the outcome is never going to be kind of exponential, right? And that's totally
that's how I feel right now. That's actually why I'm asking, like, because I'm fine with money right now, but it's not I'm like super successful. Like I have a wife, like we have enough to rent. I don't know to go to restaurants a few times a week. But like, how am I like? What is the strategy to kind of
So then I think then there's the bucket of kind of like, okay, cool. If you want to go after kind of nonlinear kind of like outcomes, at least financially, then you are in a kind of very different kind of set where it's like, okay, you're basically foregoing all the stability that you could potentially have, and you're kind of like taking shots on goal, right? And then the game ends up being how many shots on goal can you kind of like sustain kind of in your current situation or whatever, right? With personal runway, blah, blah, blah. And then the obvious next thing is kind of like, well, how do you increase your like accuracy of shot on goal, right? And so these are kind of the two games you play to maximize the overall probability that you get a non-linear outcome is taking more shots, increasing kind of the probability of kind of those happening. And this probably it probably is just expected value, right? Number of trials times kind of like probability of success, whatever. So that's probably the calculation you're kind of making. So obviously to get more shots on goal, it just means like have more money or spend less money, right? Whatever it is, but like just like one way or the other kind of do that. To increase your probability of success, that's probably kind of the like trickiest question, right? And I think probably where this goes is if you are just trying to work on that as a problem, the thing I would probably look at is what are the best opportunities right now for that? So in the entire kind of like space of things that generate nonlinear outcomes, what is the best opportunity? And I think what I mean by kind of best opportunity is like, where do these nonlinear outcomes seem to be kind of happening most often, and where kind of like relative to kind of how many people are competing for them? Because on some level, okay, I don't know if it's quite zero sum, but like if a billion people are competing for one nonlinear outcome, it's like, ooh, that's going to be kind of rough, right?
It's like AI startups, like everybody's doing them. Like we see 10 successes, but it's like thousands of developers that doing stuff that doesn't work. So yeah.
So I think then you want to kind of evaluate the opportunity kind of set in that way. And then I think the next thing you want to do is like then you want to think about what are your current competitive advantages kind of in that opportunity set, right? So obviously best case scenario is like, I am super good at this like thing that is super lucrative right now. And it's like, okay, great. Well, you're going to have a high probability of success. If you're not sure what your competitive advantage is, then the next thing I would kind of ask myself, and this is definitely what I did when I was young, which was, what are the skills that increase my probability of success, and are they obtainable, and how do I obtain them? So, for example, one thing I was very clear about doing when I was starting out with startups is, I wasn't honestly, I didn't actually think about nonlinear things. I just thought startups were fun, and so so my motivation was very different. But the thing that I thought about very clearly was, I think this thing is really fun. I want to have a career doing this thing. In order to have a career doing this thing, I need to be good at this thing, and I need to be valuable to people who are doing this thing. And then I was like, how do I make myself valuable? Because I basically was just like young, and I was like, I don't know, I'm probably not very good at anything, right? And so how do I make myself valuable to this thing? And so what I started looking around at was, what are the like really invaluable skills early stage startups and founders need? That was like the question I asked myself, right? I was like, hey, there's like this group of people I want to work with. How do I make myself super valuable to them? And the thing that I kind of like dawned on was like, okay, well, they basically always need people who can build stuff, right? So they need builders and engineers, designers, just like people that can build stuff. So I was like, okay, cool. Those are very learnable skills. Let me go learn those things. So I was like, I mean, I kind of knew how to code already. So like, let me learn how to code. Let me know how to design. And then as I did it more, I started learning that at very, very early stage startups, they really value generalist. Like,
yeah, so like I'm sorry to interrupt. Like
yeah.
I'm now working at an early stage startup that actually I kind of was interested in startups, and I didn't know where to start, so I decided to join one.
Yeah.
And it's like one of the most stressful periods of my life.
Yeah.
But like today I'm doing a little bit of coding because I'm not best at coding, but sometimes just not enough people, so I need to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I kind of that makes a lot of sense what you said. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe this is because I feel like this is kind of like a personal question to you. Email me this question. I can kind of go a little bit deeper here, Melissa. We can kind of cover more, but email me. I'm happy to kind of like talk about it. It's an interesting question.
Where can I find your email? Sorry.
I will write it right here.
Okay.
By the way, anyone else is welcome to email me too. So, but
yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Of course. Interesting question. Thanks for that. Let's get back to the queue. Conscious of time, but I think we can make it happen and not run too far over. All right, this next one. This is interesting. If I want to validate the technology, whether it's possible to be built for AI technology, how do I validate my CTO, whether she can build this before hiring? So it's basically like, how do I evaluate whether new hires, right?
Kind of. And whoever this is, do you mean CTO or co-founder? Because I feel like that's actually a different calculus here, right? I'm gonna assume. Okay, actually, I think the question is slightly different, but maybe if I'm just scoping it to kind of validating this thing, how do I validate my CTO? And I'm assuming that this person is not technical. Whether she can build this before hiring, although you're saying hiring, so it's not a co-founder. Okay, so build this before hiring. This is a special case of a broader question, which is, how do I hire people who can do a thing that I don't know how to do? Which every founder has to do, right? And engineering is, I think, the first time it kind of comes up. Okay, a couple of things that you can kind of like try to do with this. I think one of the things that you can kind of like do is you can ask them, you want to have a conversation with them about how they would go about building it, right? And so, look, you're not going to do a code review on them or anything like that, but depending on what it is that you're trying to build, you can have a conversation about like how they would go about building that kind of like that thing. And I think you can ask increasingly more detailed questions, and they should be able to explain it in such a way that you understand. And I think that's really important. I think sometimes people who are not technical feel like they just won't understand any of it. And so they don't even try. And I think that's actually to non-technical people's kind of detriment. Good engineers can explain how to build stuff to non-technical people. Like, I don't know who, again, I don't know who answers this question, but like, you're not dumb. Like, you can understand how it is to kind of build this on kind of like a high level. And so if somebody was building a piece of technology for me that I wasn't sure if they could build, I would ask them about kind of like, how would they kind of go about building it? You know, I don't know. Again, it's hard to do without kind of like knowing what it is, but it's like, you know, what kind of technologies would they kind of use? Where would they start? What is the like? What does it kind of like look like? What do you think the different pieces are? And I would just like have a long conversation where I just ask lots of questions in increasing detail, and I have them kind of explaining to me. And if somebody can't do that, there's probably a high likelihood that they're not going to be able to kind of like build it. And if they can explain it to you, there's a high likelihood that they're going to be able to kind of like build that. Almost what you're doing is like you're asking them to kind of like do the architect of it, and then all they have to do is like sit down and like type it, basically, right? And so certainly for somebody who's kind of CTO, you should be able to kind of like do that to be built for AI tech. I mean, the other part of this too is like, wow, depends on how hard it is. I was going to say, it's like you could try to get a feel for like, can they build some small version of something as kind of like a homework assignment for as part of the like hiring process? But like, that's, I don't know, it's going to be too limited in kind of scope. But I would ask them, I would kind of talk to them about it and see how they would kind of like build what you're kind of like asking them to do. And if you have any questions about how like this piece would work and you're not sure about it, I would ask that. Be like, hey, how would we make it so that people could do X? And then they should be able to kind of like talk about it, right? So yeah, ask them about how to do it.
All right, next question. Planning to start something that I think should be focused on community and content first, since the value is based on that. What are your tips?
Focus on those things first is my first part. I mean, look, I think Melissa and I actually just had a conversation about this with some of the things that we were working on, but like distribution ends up being kind of the most important thing for early stage stuff. And so to me, community and content, if that's going to be kind of your way to kind of distribute your product, I would work on that first. Maybe as a good example of this, if people are familiar with Product Hunt, I'm sure people are. Product Hunt is this website. It was very popular before. I think it's still popular. Producthunt.com. Yeah. Okay. This website. If people are familiar with Product Hunt. So Ryan Hoover, who is the founder of Product Hunt, is an old friend of mine. And Product Hunt got really big, and it got really big in part because Ryan Hoover had written a bunch of had written a lot of blog posts and had his own blog that was pretty popular before he built Product Hunt. And he was primarily writing about products, and he was interviewing people in SF that worked on products. And so he had built this user base. He had built this like following of people who are interested in products and cared about products and were kind of product nerds. And then at some point, he basically made a product that was all about showcasing the new products that were coming out. And it's like it immediately grew because he built a product for this existing base that he already had. Now, to be clear, Ryan worked on his blog with no sense of Product Hunt at all. Like, it wasn't like his master plan. But you can kind of see that like it really helped Product Hunt get started because he had already built the following and that kind of stuff. And so, you know, I think actually we should have him come and speak to the Iterative founders at some point. But like, I think he spent 2 years building this distribution before Product Hunt. And so if the content and community is a really big piece of it, then I would go work on that kind of like first and kind of like build that. It's also a good test case too, because if you can't get the community and content piece to work, then, you know, the product probably won't work either. So, you know, then you save yourself from having to build the product. So yeah, I would just go work on this first, but yeah, Product Hunt. I'm user 6, by the way. My user ID, I don't know, they have like millions of users, but I'm the 6th user. And it's in part because when he first launched it, he sent it to like a couple of friends to kind of sign up as product. And I'm like user 6 or something like that, which used to be very cool. People thought that was cool.
Still sounds cool. All right, this next question. On an abstract level, for a founder with PM experience and amateur coding and marketing experience, do you suggest starting or trying
Great
to
question.
B2B or B2C ideas?
Yeah, great question. Great question. This kind of sounds like me, to be honest. Like I'm a founder. I have kind of like product kind of experience, maybe a little bit heavier on kind of design than what's here. I can code, but I'm probably like a crappy engineer. And like I kind of like learned enough marketing to kind of get by. I don't know if it matters that much. As in, like, I probably wouldn't make a decision on one of these two things purely on my background. I typically choose what to work on based on what I think is interesting and kind of like a good problem to solve. And so I don't work on kind of like my background. And the reason why I say that is because I pick something I'm interested in first and is a good problem. And then I just figure out what I need to like learn in order to like be successful at that. And so I work from that vantage point rather than like, what am I good at? And so what should I do? B2C is kind of like an obvious kind of play here because, it has kind of like a little bit more emphasis on kind of like PM design and kind of like marketing and that kind of stuff. But B2B oftentimes is that now too. So, I mean, I don't know. I guess if you were going to like force me to make a choice, maybe B2C, because B2B is like you kind of need to have like sales is an important piece of this. And so you would have to kind of like go learn how to do sales. But honestly, you can learn how to do sales. So I wouldn't let that stop you. So I think either is fine. But I mean, if you're making me choose, I guess B2C. By the way, B2C harder in Southeast Asia. So that's another thing to kind of like weigh in. So I don't know.
All right, we have technically 1 minute left. So Ken, do you have a little bit of time?
Yeah.
Okay. We have 4 more questions, so I think we can get it done within 10, 15 minutes. All right, this next one. How can you validate repeat business? So say your customers give you positive feedback for year 1, buy your product, but can we predict for year 2 onward?
Not really. It's going to be like, I wish I had a kind of a good reason for this. I mean, look, so the more stepped up version of this is basically kind of like retention is the thing you're kind of like asking. So there's customer retention, and you can do that on a monthly basis rather than a yearly basis, right? So you can cut it up into kind of shorter kind of like segments. So rather than the year 2, I can be like, okay, they've stuck around for the first 12 months. Did they stick around for month 13, month 14, 15, 16, all of that kind of stuff. And so I would break it down into kind of shorter months. Can we predict? Okay, maybe you can predict if you look at kind of usage patterns and that kind of stuff, right? So if Melissa signs up for my product and she pays for like year 1 and she hasn't logged into the product in like 2 months, probably not going to pay for year 2, right? So I guess you can kind of look at usage patterns and that kind of stuff to get a sense of like whether that's going to kind of happen. So maybe those things. Melissa might just give me positive feedback because she's being nice to me, but like proof in the pudding is like, does Melissa actually use the product or not? And if she hasn't logged in 2 months, she's probably not going to pay regardless of whatever she says. So maybe that's the best way to do it. Usage.
Next question. We are building a fintech on top of WhatsApp. We would like to see whether other startups have done this and what happened. Where should I look?
Google. I guess it depends on what the idea is, but like, I mean, when we do this all the time when we get applications, we're like, is anyone else doing this? And we start just Googling stuff. So if you're doing like buy now, pay later on WhatsApp, I would just Google buy now, pay later WhatsApp, right? And see if anything kind of like comes up. Sometimes I put startup in there, but it's just Google. I'm guessing you don't want to pay for this because we don't even pay for this, but like you could look up Crunchbase in some of these places, but even then it's like you kind of need to know what the right words are. So I would try to find out what the industry terms are for what you're doing, and then I would kind of like Google those terms and then just search for that. But that's all I do basically. Ask people who are in that space, I guess, maybe another way, if you have kind of access to something that works. Ask investors. Investors see tons of stuff. So I feel like investors are actually better at telling you than other founders.
All right, this next one is kind of a big one. How do startups prepare for something like what OpenAI did? They killed all AI agent startups that were GPT wrappers, but any startup is some kind of wrapper, right?
How does prepare something like what? That's funny. That's interesting. I mean, we invested in an AI agent startup. Okay, so this is why investors always kind of like we're a little bit nervous about investing in kind of like AI startups that are built on OpenAI. Anytime you kind of build on somebody else, you run into this risk, right? This happened with Twitter. This happened with them. I mean, hell, this happened to like people who are selling on Amazon. Like Amazon Basics as like a product line was like very problematic because it was like, oh, Melissa, I see that you are selling this thing that holds an iPhone or whatever. Amazon work is going to make that now. And Melissa's like, what the hell? Like, you are the person who sells my product, and now you can, like, gosh, like, so anytime you are on other people's kind of platform, this is kind of like a problem that kind of like you work on. So sometimes the opportunity is worth the risk, but you always kind of run this risk. So you just have to know that when you're building on somebody else's platform. So like if you build on WhatsApp, it's the same kind of game, right? You're going to like worry about this.
All right. And this next one is a good one to end on, I think. How do startups raise so much money without a single customer? I believe in validation, but then I see XYZ AI thing raising 30 million pre-seed, and it's discouraging.
Yeah, I think the thing I would kind of like say here is like, don't compare yourself to kind of other kind of like startups and stuff. It's that startup that raised 30 million pre-seed also is comparing themselves to somebody who raised 60 million pre-seed, and they also feel bad about themselves. So everybody just feels bad about themselves. So I just don't do this kind of like at all. To answer the question about kind of like how they're able to do this is like, typically it's like a founder with kind of like very kind of like unique set of skills or some background that is like very unique and kind of like says this. So like, for example, like, I don't know, if the co-founder of Google started another company, they could probably raise like 200 million pre-seed, right? And it's like, it's the co-founder of like Google. By the way, a lot of people think it's nepotism. It is not. I think this is a thing that people are kind of like is that I think they think nepotism is more rampant and prevalent in VCs than it actually is. It definitely exists. I'm not trying to say it doesn't exist, but the amount of times that I've actually ran into it in Silicon Valley is actually really, really low and rare. And the reason why it's low and rarer than people think is at the end of the day, you are investing tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars into the company that you are going to lose. And so it's like, yeah, you could do nepotism and invest in your friend and lose $100 million. And then your investors don't invest in you anymore. And then you're like out. So like, yes, nepotism does exist. But at the end of the day, it's like, you kind of have to believe that these things kind of like are going to work because your like money is on the line. Right. And so I think it's like a surprise. VC is a place that surprisingly does not have as much nepotism as you would originally kind of think, because incentives are aligned in such a way where it's like, you better actually believe in this person. Like you can't just invest in your like friend, because then you're going to like lose money. Right. So, I don't know. I don't have any friends that I like enough where I would give them $30 million. And if I didn't think they were actually going to be able to pull it off.
All right, that is the last question. We are 6 minutes over, so not too bad. Appreciate everybody who contributed questions, who upvoted. Really good questions, really stimulating discussions and responses from Hsu Ken and folks in the chat.